It's a piece of a puzzle that I'm presenting, a piece of the puzzle that we've been working on for more than 8 years now. I'll give some context. Always very difficult to understand context if it's very remote. And then I'll leap into some a walkthrough mode. And if I don't say much, that's also okay because it's fairly open-ended in the way it's designed and supposed to be experienced. Small practice, we're only 3 people. After winning it through competition, for an attitude, not for a building, they were then redistributed to do separate buildings. So the competition concept was quite interesting. So the context, South Africa. I'm also from Cape Town, as Joe, the previous speaker. And then there's Kimberley, which is the Ayers Rock of South Africa, very remote. Very few South Africans have been there. So it's even exotic for us as a location. Lots of sun, very remote, as I said earlier, which comes with all sorts of opportunities and constraints in terms of resources and just getting there to do the job and build it. And then little rain, hot days, cold nights. So we're essentially dealing with a whole hot, dry climate. And those are the realities of the site. How do you deal with these things? And how do you densify at the same time? And I'll get to the densification. That's the landscape, hardly any trees, as you can see. Vernacular architecture in that region looks like this. They essentially cool caves, just getting out of the sun, and then shifting around that little building as it suits. And that's the summary. Essentially, how if you do a new building today, you still have to work within that sort of idiom, thick walls, small openings, and then moving around this thing. Some of our previous work, a preoccupation with light, I'm not going to dwell on that. And then also imperfection. Any of you that's visited Le Corbusier's buildings will understand this. There's a beauty to that too. And that's part of the equation. You compromise all the time because you have to, and that's part of the beauty. But you work out every detail, and then you just see how it works out. But you're fairly forgiving in the way it plays out. Kimberley is now forgotten, but at one point it was part of a rush to dig out all those diamonds, and you can see the big hole between 1870 and 1924. Chrysler fitting into that hole. Man-made effort, huge man-made effort. And we're now living in an age where that's so little the case. And then the metaphor is this: how do you translate that energy into building new buildings in that context? City building. So this is a new university built in this town, which is part of a very sparsely populated province. That's the fabric initially around that big hole. And then it started sprawling. And so the principle was to build a new campus and to densify at the same time, to demonstrate those through a framework, which we didn't do, but which was fundamental in the way we all worked. That little red footprint is the building that we're going to be talking about. So that's the campus in context. More or less the footprints that are built now after 10 years or so. And you can see the footprint there with the total footprint with a small footprint inside it. Proper catalytic work, and you can see the evolution of the campus over time, with that red footprint again within it. So the work is stereoatomic. We embrace the use of brick. It's almost like using a big piece of clay and then carving back into it, not using modular systems. The only modular is the brick, and to use a plastic way of building. That is a compounded knowledge map of current developments that have been completed with our footprint inside it. That is the footprint there in the frame. So you're working with the surrogate context through the framework, and you're working with the real context with some of those buildings being completed. So the process was absolutely fascinating for us to work on. So that triangular building, not very big, 2,500 square meters, budget about £3 million in total. Place of many places. It's really about that. Any campus is about this, the life between classes, and to make that work, not about the building, but the spaces inside and out. So there's the building sitting in that framework. And there's the pattern of movement, which is obviously random. It's just indicative, but that is something really important to work with, meaning the building is permeable, especially at its ground level, and has that solidity that I just mentioned. In the form response again, we post-rationalized the building for WAF, because it's such a difficult building to explain in plan form. You have to do it three-dimensionally, like an Adolf Lewis round plan type building. That's early model in terms of the fit and our fellow architects around us in a charrette process developing the buildings. Proper iterative work, really, really enjoyable with Heather and other architects on the precinct. Iteration, process, crafting, and just enjoying the process with the engineer on the left there. So it's really drawing this building from the earth and using 80%, 90% brick, and then almost like a Leverance building, and then taking joy in the detail and the crafting within that context. And you see the imperfection again. That is a sort of a massing cut open model, which I'll give some detail of now. This is the shared, the Louis Kahn servant spaces diagrams. I'm not going to bore you with the plan. Challenge was to fit an auditorium into a triangular footprint, but it also generated very sort of interesting opportunities with the juxtapositions that followed. And then just a quick walkthrough. That's the main square. It's completed, it's vibrant, it's working, it's a fantastic space, urban design proven over and over again. Densification in a very remote context, proven, and the value of that. Going a bit further down, then you see our building, our piece of the puzzle starting to appear at the bottom of the image there, the furthest point on the main pedestrian spine. One step further, the journey, it should really speak for itself. I shouldn't be saying that much. Then you start turning, you're looking at a transparent interface. Those glaze screens can open. You can move through the building and flow depending on the climate and the pattern of use. That's the auditorium floor there, and you're starting to look back. And you can see the imperfection that I mentioned, but these things tend to become more acceptable and beautiful over time as they settle. There's a bit of a video. I'll just stop it. When there was a comment about people, the building was photographed just after COVID, so it was quite difficult to find people. But here we have some of them moving into that promenade condition that you'll see just now, moving through and into the building and animating the space. Then you get to the headboard condition of the buildings. There's a little pocket square. This is south facing, which is shaded. So in lieu of trees, the shade of the buildings themselves become important. So that's a headboard condition, but a very well used space. And then you have apertures cut in to provide light. You've got that intense light in the Northern Cape, and they become abstract pieces of art in their own right without intentionally being that or being envisaged to be that. The thick walls are real. The detailing was a joy. The imperfection again at the top, all accepted. The cool cave, the inside space, cutting it open, and you can see the layering inside that space. As I said earlier, no specific module or grid, just carving, molding, working with the builders on site, 2 flights a week, lots of time spent with the builders, master builder definition of the architect. See the cutout again. That's the movement inside the building, same principle. Now you go inside. Trams, yellow trams, not unique to Lisbon. This is at the Diamond Museum in Kimberley. That's then used as part of the language in the metaphor for the jewelry. And so you have the brick, you have the punctured yellow, and you've got the white walls inside the cool cave. And we start moving inside. And you can see the imperfection there, but the layering, the juxtaposition. Dramatic space that was possible because of that auditorium's juxtapositioning and the promenade condition. You can see the metaphor of those yellow baskets and the tram system and the light coming in indirectly through those apertures that you saw on the outside walls earlier. Light, indirect light, giving it a spiritual quality, a cathedral-like feel. Informal seating areas, pockets, indirect light again. You can see the wash onto the walls. And you can see that we had time as well. Over 8 years, we crafted these interfaces without complicating the detail and the constructability of it. So we're going up the stairs now, Looking back, study areas. Going up the stairs. Some detail and imperfection again. Inside the auditorium, opportunity for natural light. Lots of electricity cuts in South Africa. So that is a sort of a demand on the building. Okay, thank you. I'll just stop with that one. Thanks, Paul.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. What a stunning building. It's interesting you said we had time. I think that's something that as architects we so often don't have time. The idea of having time to really craft something and enjoying the imperfections. It's a real raw beauty to this. There are moments of imperfection, but you're absolutely right. They sit so comfortably. I've got a couple of kind of practical questions. One is, can you say a bit more about who's using this building? I'm assuming it's for the whole campus, so it's university students using it?
Yes, the framework is interesting in the sense that the mass was given, it was almost frozen by the urban designer, and the program developed. And the attitude was, if it doesn't fit into a building, you just put some of the balance into the next building. That's the benefit when you do a whole new campus, but by different architects. So the program actually came into play, and the upper floors are offices, and this is a shared facility, and that's why it's called the auditorium building, and it's got this permeable interface. And in lieu of trees, the lobby spaces are actually the trees outside the auditorium. So it becomes this fluid space, and the offices are fairly functional, and the challenge is just bring light and ventilation into them.
I mean, I could ask another 10 questions, but I won't.
Yeah.
I'll go to the end and start with Richard.
Thank you for this beautiful project. You showed the urban design through the models and site plans, and there was one view across the outdoor space that showed it relative to the context. But I think on a campus building, there's a reciprocal relationship between the campus and the design of a new building. And
Yes.
sort of an obligation to
Yes.
extend or continue.
Yes.
Could you talk about that in relationship to this?
Yes, being an urban designer, I often find it problematic that every architect wants to redo the framework. In this case, we were appointed as architects with another urban designer. So this respect for the framework was intrinsic to our attitude, saying, just accept the framework, work within it, accept the code. And those constraints then become the opportunities. And that's what you see, a triangular building with a brief that only came into play later. And all those juxtapositions and tensions was what we had fun with, putting an auditorium into a triangle, for instance, and all the other spaces.
But if we could add to that the character of the building and the choice of materials,
Yes.
and those design decisions.
Yes. I think the decision to work with brick as far as we can relates to the skills levels and the fact that contractors were appointed on a 5-year program so that they could develop skills. So that simple use of materials came out of the brief. That was part of the brief. But the choice of bricks was collective. Heather, ourselves, and all the other architects. So that red brick is typical of the campus, but not the detail and the articulation of the buildings.
Is it?
I've seen that you've shown traditional examples of architecture, and I'm interested in knowing a little bit more about the link between the final building and that example. For instance, being from West Africa, building in West Africa, looking at traditional architecture helps us understand that cross-ventilation, for instance, is key in our job.
Yes.
And I would like to maybe hear a little bit more about the link between the final building and the strategy that you used of
Yes.
relationship to traditional buildings.
Yes. If you go to Kimberley, people are very humble, they're very modest. The architecture, the vernacular is very simple, straightforward. You saw that little structure, just a stone, basic, dealing with essence. That became our brief. We all embraced that and really enjoyed that. So that solidity, monolithic form, stereoatomic work is something that the campus became. And we wish to think that if you go to Kimberley or see pictures, you know it's in Africa. It's not in Australia or the UK or anywhere else. It is off that place. And I think that is a collective, and I must also give credit to the urban designer. I mean, Ludwig Hansen, who did a sterling job in guiding all of us towards the campus that you see, using the vernacular.
All right.
until this last image, I didn't understand the whole. It was looking asymmetrical, but it's symmetrical. So, can you explain a little bit on the plan? It's part of the auditorium.
Yes, it's actually not symmetrical. There's a splay. You can see how it cuts into the seating on the right-hand side, going up the ramp or the stairs there. And it's an interesting question. We probably had 20 iterations in terms of fitting 180 seats into a triangular form. And as an urban designer, I have new respect now, for this thing of just being given a form, and then you just have to make it work. But it then became so obvious, and we just pursued this. It doesn't affect the quality of the space at all to have the display on the one side. If I have to go to the plan, it'll just take a bit long, but it's not symmetrical. Yeah.
I like the building very much. I particularly enjoyed your presentation. I found it very humorous, real humour and a sense of levity, which is often rare in our profession. I just wonder, do you think if you infuse the building with humour, is there something about that approach that you feel is evidence in the building itself?
Yeah, and I studied in the era of complexity and contradiction, and I still love listening to Venturi because of his sense of humor. Not his work, but his way of communicating, and that's always stayed with me. I'm a bit of a Venturian from Africa. So you see that in the work, but people have commented often on the informality of the way we cut openings into buildings, whether it's a residential or a civic building. So if you look at our work, that is a constant. That joy in almost crafting things in an informal way, not be too serious about that, to give the sense of humor through color and openings.
Since we've got a bit more time, I'd like to ask a bit about the environmental strategy, and with that such a fluctuating range of temperatures day and night,
Yes.
and sort of quite robust and simple in many ways, but
Yes.
in many ways also not simple. Can you talk a bit about environmental strategy?
Yes, and I think that's an important question because I didn't have time for that. We're using ground source heating in these buildings. It's perfect for that, the solid earth. So there's a ground source heating and cooling campus-wide infrastructure that's installed. It was experimental initially because we don't have the infrastructure and the technology for the piping and stuff. So we were fortunate to have a mechanical engineer called Koos Ace. He actually invented these things, and we developed that and put it into the buildings. It works fantastic. Experimental initially, proven to work, and now it's the default. But the brick and the sustainability is also in the level of detail and to make it sustainable through people's ability to engage in the building contract, and the density. In that very low density sprawl environment is the other factor. So I always say density is the silver bullet of sustainable practice. All the other things pale in comparison. It's all about density, and that's what we achieved here, I believe, all of us collectively.
Thank you very much. Would you like to come and accept your award?